be totally wrong.
Something from Wake Lift.
Is there an outlet?
We're recording now.
Yeah. All right, so you can plug into the power supply right there. I was like, I'm gonna need that for the lights though. You're trashing my scene, Bryce? How about I trash your lights?
Those lights can't be trashed.
Oh, they can be, but they're in Banzetto when it gets compact.
You're a nice guy. You're a nice
You
guy.
don't know actors.
Yeah, you don't know what it's like to work with actors. How come all my pedals are unplugged?
I unplugged one from the power strip I just gave you. That one's up or down.
We know one.
Nope.
Plug that into something.
You know Ashley? You know my favorite? No, I got a job. She just gave notice for the second job.
What are you playing, Dave?
Really good at
I forgot all the words too. I'll remember them in a minute.
We are totally ready for tour.
creation and destruction of the planet have one thing in common. That is, they both submit and return life on Earth to a continuity with the infinite. Human concerns are innate and contained and die with each generation. When the planet ceases to contain human life and the solar system burns out with the slow but inevitable cooling of the sun, so too will Earth and the colossal history of each of its species become one with the endlessness of the universe's indifferent legacy known only to itself. What, I wonder, is the last sound we hear before rejoining infinity? Metal music has always made sense to me because through volume and to most imperceptible form, mirrors the destruction that created every life on the planet. A blinding light, the sonic boom, and the warming of the surface of the earth. And perhaps someone has, unbeknownst to themselves, found the noise that greeted every life on Earth before their destruction millions of years ago. And perhaps that noise is not dissimilar to that which greets us after our hearts stop beating. Convention suggests it will be silence. Those of us who have heard real silence know that it is in fact the loudest sound known to man. Life here is so insignificant and the universe is so indifferent to it that occasionally rocks from the abyss have restarted all of life on a whim. All that remains of millions of years of development and evolution is a span about the length of a human being somewhere between the crust and the core of the earth, which we might never have discovered. Soon we'll represent a piece of Earth that small on a planet too hot to sustain life. Should anyone want to find evidence we ever existed, they would have to dig. We bury our dead in preparation for our hopeful discovery by intelligences greater than our own. What will they make of us and all that we have done? Will any one of us be remembered? If on a certain evening about 66 million years ago you had stood somewhere in North America and looked up at the sky, you would have soon made out what appeared to be a star. If you watched for an hour or two, the star would have seemed to have grown in brightness, although it barely moved. That's because it was not a star but an asteroid, and it was headed directly for Earth at about 45,000 miles an hour. 60 hours later, the asteroid hit. The air in front was compressed and violently heated, and it blasted a hole through the atmosphere, generating a supersonic shockwave. The asteroid struck a shallow sea where the Yucatan Peninsula is today. In that moment, the Cretaceous period ended and the Paleogene period began. A few years ago, scientists at Los Alamos National Laboratory used what was then one of the world's most powerful computers, the so-called Q machine, to model the effects of the impact. The result was a slow-motion, second-by-second, false-color video of the event. Within 2 minutes of slamming into Earth, the asteroid, which was at least 6 miles wide, had gouged a crater about 18 miles deep and lofted 25 trillion metric tons of debris into the atmosphere. Picture the splash of a pebble falling into pond water, but on a planetary scale. When Earth's crust rebounded, a peak higher than Mount Everest briefly rose up. The energy released was more than that of 1 billion Hiroshima bombs, but the blast looked nothing like a nuclear explosion with its signature mushroom cloud. Instead, the initial blowout formed a rooster tail, a gigantic jet of molten material which exited the atmosphere, some of it fanning out over North America. Much of the material was several times hotter than the surface of the sun, and it set fire to everything within 1,000 miles. In addition, an inverted cone of liquefied, superheated rock rose, spread outward as countless red-hot blobs of glass, called tektites, and blanketed the western hemisphere. Some of the ejecta escaped Earth's gravitational pull and went into irregular orbits around the sun. Over millions of years, bits of it found their way to other planets and moons in the solar system. Mars was eventually strewn with the debris, just as pieces of Mars knocked aloft by ancient asteroid impacts have been found on Earth. The asteroid may have sown life throughout the solar system, even as it ravaged life on Earth. The asteroid was vaporized on impact. Its substance, mingling with vaporized Earth rock, formed a fiery plume which reached halfway to the moon before collapsing in a pillar of incandescent dust. Computer models suggest that the atmosphere within 1,500 miles of ground zero became red hot from the debris storm, triggering gigantic forest fires. As the Earth rotated, the airborne material converged at the opposite side of the planet, where it fell and set fire to the Indian subcontinent. Measurements of the layer of ash and soot that eventually coated the Earth indicate that fires consumed about 70% of the world's forests. Meanwhile, giant tsunamis resulted from the impact, churned across the Gulf of Mexico, tearing up coastlines, sometimes peeling up hundreds of feet of rock, pushing debris inland, and then sucking it back out into deep water, leaving jumbled deposits that oilmen sometimes encounter in the course of deep-sea drilling. The damage had only begun. Scientists still debate many of the details which are derived from the computer models and from field studies of the debris layer, knowledge of extinction rates, fossils and microfossils, and many other clues, but the overall view is consistently grim. The dust and soot from the impact and the conflagrations prevented all sunlight from reaching the planet's surface for months. Photosynthesis all but stopped, killing most of the plant life, extinguishing the phytoplankton in the oceans, and causing the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere to plummet. After the fires died down, Earth plunged into a period of cold, perhaps even a deep freeze. Earth's two essential food chains in the sea and on land collapsed, and 75% of all species went extinct. More than 99.999% of all living organisms on Earth died. Then the carbon cycle came to a halt. Earth itself became toxic. When the asteroid struck, it vaporized layers of limestone, releasing into the atmosphere 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide, 10 billion tons of methane, and 1 billion tons of carbon monoxide, all 3 powerful greenhouse gases. The impact also vaporized anhydrite rock, which blasted 10 trillions of tons of sulfur compounds aloft. The sulfur combined with water to form sulfuric acid, which then fell as an acid rain that may have been potent enough to strip the leaves from many surviving plants and to leach the nutrients from the soil. Today, the layers of debris, ash, and soot deposited by the asteroid strike is preserved in the Earth's sediment as a stripe of black about the thickness of a notebook. This is called the KT boundary because it marks the dividing line between the Cretaceous period and the Tertiary period. Mysteries abound above and below the KT layer. In the late Cretaceous, widespread volcanoes spewed vast quantities of gas and dust into the atmosphere, and the air contained far higher levels of carbon dioxide than the air that we breathe now. The climate was tropical, and the planet was perhaps entirely free of ice. Yet scientists know very little about the animals and plants that were living at the time, and as a result they have been searching for fossil deposits as close to the KT boundary as possible. One of the central mysteries of paleontology is the so-called 3-meter problem. In a century and a half of assiduous searching, almost no dinosaur remains have been found in the layers 3 meters, or about 9 feet below the KT boundary, a depth representing many thousands of years. Consequently, numerous paleontologists have argued that the dinosaurs were on the way to extinction long before the asteroid struck, owing perhaps to volcanic eruptions and climate change. Locked in the KT boundary are the answers to our questions about one of the most significant events in the history of life on the planet. If one looks at the Earth as a kind of living organism, as many biologists do, you could say that it was shot by a bullet and almost died. Deciphering what happened on the day of destruction is crucial not only to solving the 3-meter problem, but also to explaining our own genesis as a species. strikes me that the most merciful thing you could do for a human being is to never create it. It is said that we're the only living thing able to contemplate its own existence. It must also be said that we waste this gift at every opportunity. Rather than understanding the perimeters of our own lives, we insist on controlling those of everybody else. People we will never meet or see with our own eyes. There is an apparently insatiable urge in most humans to take things away from other people, instead of making anything of what we have, however limited that may be. As I write this, the United States government is redoubling decades of effort to take the right to abortion away from women, while at the same time doing everything in its power to destroy the planet by stoking and then ignoring a horrifying change in our climate that portends a future of unlivable conditions for Homo sapiens. A small number of people in power mean to force children into this nightmare reality they have tailored for our existential torment. Feeling no control over their own desires, they have decided to destroy the planet and ensure that there are as many generations of unwanted and poor and angry people around to experience it as possible. Villainy, plain and simple. A biblical retribution against the humanity they never really understood. An unborn child never has to leave infinity and join us here, sparing them a realm of pure neuroses and fear of debts and depressions and pain. How I envy the never born at my lowest. But for a rock from the abyss, we would never have come this far. We would do good to remember that we just as easily might never have existed. Freedom over our bodies belongs to everyone, because we have all come from the same silence, and to it we are all once more bound. To be spared the thought of the silence is mercy. A species that seeks to take away mercy has fundamentally misunderstood its place on this planet.
Thank you for having us once again. Buy a record before you go. Not ours. Something from the store. It's not ours. Something else. Thank you so much.
I think my first feeling was one of overwhelming sadness. There are all sorts of things I won't see and I won't do. One or two people have written to me and, consolingly and said, well, we all die, but fuck it, it's not like we all die. It's like you have 4 months.